Hello, everyone. It's great to see some familiar faces and some new friends that I've met this week. Welcome to the top 10 ways to evolve your cloud-native incident response maturity. In this session, we'll be going over different ways that you can learn about how incident response is different in the cloud and using best practices to mature your incident response. My name is Sarah Curry. I'm a security practice leader with AWS Professional Services, and I lead a team of security engineers that actually work with our customers in their environments to assess, implement, and deploy different security solutions. So I'll be talking about some of our different customer examples today.
Awesome. And my name is Anna McBee. I am a security specialist solutions architect, so I focus a ton on threat detection and incident response. I wrote our incident response white paper, if you've read that, within AWS. So that's really my expertise, and so I'm really excited to go through some of these items. This comes up a lot with how we can help customers evolve in their incident response maturity. So I'll go ahead and move on. So this is our disclaimer. Obviously, I think you guys, if you've been at RSA a good amount, you guys should read through this. I'm going to skip through it
Make
quite
strong
a bit.
judgment calls.
Yeah, strong judgment. Read through the disclaimer. So in our agenda, we're going to go through an overview of AWS incident response as well as just general incident response to understand what's different. Then we're going to go through what should you do as a practitioner to evolve your incident response capabilities. So I thought this picture accurately described some of the challenges of incident response. I'd say the number one thing I see, and I've worked with a ton of different industries and companies, is there's usually a very large skills gap within the incident response in the cloud. So there's kind of a bit of a deer in headlights. They have to understand network, endpoint, and then they now have to understand the cloud as well. So usually this is kind of what their faces look like. So hopefully we can address some of these challenges. I would say the number one challenge is the cloud skills gap, but hopefully today we can address some of the other challenges as well, which are obviously a bunch more than just the skills gap. So to give an overview of AWS incident response, I think I'm going to start with a general incident response overview. So what is incident response? I'm sure many of you have probably have an understanding of this, but it is an important thing to understand. So at the end of the day, it's still a people, process, and technology problem. So it's still your security operations folks, your forensics folks, threat intelligence. Those are the people that are really engaged. From a process perspective, this is still your incident response plan, building your playbooks. And then technology, this is your SIM, your EDR. And so hopefully we can still show how we can apply these technologies or these concepts from an AWS perspective to your environment. So if you've worked in incident response in a long time, you've probably seen the incident response lifecycle. And I'm not going to harp too long on this, but it is important that we're trying to stay to this frame of reference. So I think the best way to explain AWS incident response is actually looking at the frame of reference of what people are familiar with, right? And usually it's this. And so when we think of preparation, those are developing your incident response plans. Detection, this would be your initial indicators. How do you determine if a incident is truly an incident? Containment, this would be how do you actually scope an incident, reduce the scope, and then towards the end, post-incident activity, that would be kind of learning from it. How do you iterate on your processes as well? So again, this presentation, we really want to focus on the differences of cloud incident response and not traditional incident response, but we really wanted to at least set up some of these foundations in case everybody, wasn't maybe familiar with those as well. So now Sarah is going to go through the fun part, which is the differences of AWS incident response.
Yes, so like I said, I work with professional services, so I work really closely with customers in their actual environment. And I work with customers that are all over the spectrum of their maturity when it comes to security and incident response. But the number one question we get as people are moving towards the cloud is, what is the big difference with incident response in the cloud? And I did just want to preference too that we've built this, that even if you're not using AWS, if you're using another cloud provider, it's still going to relate to that based on best practices. So one of the big drivers that people have towards moving towards the cloud is actually the shared responsibility model. Maybe they want to be relieved of some of the responsibility of physical security of data centers. So I'm a visual learner, so let's take a look at this model here. And this is going to help to understand the shared responsibility model. If any of you attended the lovely Chris Ferris's Walking on Broken Clouds yesterday, you might have heard that there are some complications with the shared responsibility model. It can be kind of difficult to understand what is the cloud provider responsible for versus the customer. So you can see AWS is going to be responsible for operating and managing the host operating system down and the virtualization layer down to the actual physical security of the facilities where the services are running, where the customer is going to be responsible for data, different access management with IAM, and different provisions like that. But where it gets complicated is depending on the cloud services that you choose will impact your IR in the cloud. So if you are using EC2, there's going to be some shared responsibility in terms of patch management and configuration management. But as you move more towards managed services or serverless, you'll have less responsibility in terms of the shared responsibility model. Another aspect that's different within cloud security and incident response on the cloud is the cloud security domain. So again, with the shared responsibility model, this was something that was created with cloud incident response, and this is the service domain. So the service domain encompasses the customer's AWS account, IAM permissions, resource metadata, billing, and other resources like that. And so what's going to be different about this in the cloud is that it's the way that you respond to an incident. So it's not going to be your traditional host-based or network-based response. It's going to be through reviewing and initializing API calls. And so with this different security and service domain, what you're going to be looking at is you might not actually be looking at the affected resources operating system. So an example of this is that if you have a security event in the service domain, let's talk about an architectural anti-pattern. So maybe you have an unauthorized user that gets access to long-term security credentials from an IAM user. And then let's say that IAM user has an IAM policy that's attached to it that you can actually retrieve objects from an Amazon S3 bucket. So in the cloud, with incident response, you're going to actually look at the logs through API calls using AWS APIs, and also you would recover this, this event also again with APIs. So next, going into number 3 for APIs for provisioning infrastructure, you might see a trend here with APIs in the cloud. So something that's going to be different here again is looking at using the RESTful APIs and having the public and private endpoints that are available through many different geolocations. So again, one of the big reasons people move into the cloud is that you're able to deploy to different regions globally within minutes, which is great, but it's going to complicate things a little bit more with incident response. And when it comes to these APIs, they're going to be able to provision this different infrastructure with your AWS credentials. And these AWS credentials are not going to be like the traditional a traditional incident response where it's connected necessarily to a network. So it's going to be from the AWS IAM principles, which is inside your AWS account. So that's something when you're going through incident response that's going to be important because it might not be something that's bound to your network. So as you're going through an incident, you might actually see that there are an incident that's occurring outside of your expected network or geographical location. And the next three, so for dynamic nature of the cloud, this is a big reason that people move to the cloud, is the elasticity of the cloud. You're able to auto-scale, you can provision resources really quickly and deprovision really quickly based on the increased traffic, so again, to support the needs of your customer. However, again, for incident response, this can make it a little tough if you're investigating resources that as you're investigating, they might no longer be there. Or they might be modified because, again, of auto-scaling and different changes because of the short-lived infrastructure in the cloud and the dynamic changes. So this is something to be aware of and making sure that you're understanding how different resources are created and deleted so that you can look at that for incident analysis. And for data access, so again, not like traditional incident response where you can just plug into a server, get the data for a security investigation. What are you going to use? That's right, API calls. So you're going to use API calls to be able to gather that data, and you're also going to want to make sure that you have the appropriate storage to collect that and retain data as needed. And lastly, importance of automation. So that's not necessarily different than traditional incident response, but in the cloud, you're going to be using different services like infrastructure as code. So with AWS, it's AWS CloudFormation, but to be honest, most of my customers are using Terraform with different multi-cloud environments. And so with the importance of, I don't know if that's going on. With the importance of automation, it's going to help reduce human error, but also it's a lot easier to implement in the cloud so that you can provision and deprovision resources.
Yeah. So I was curious, do we have any feedback on some of these core differences? Has anyone experienced any of these differences, or anyone want to share anything? I could share, or I could call on people. I mean, I know a few of you in the crowd, so yeah.
Aren't you worried about painting the environment with APIs?
Painting? Painting?
Like contaminating, yeah. When you're destroying or meddling with it.
So I would say, obviously there's benefits of using APIs. So I'm not sure what you mean. How would it taint APIs?
Tainting the environment you're investigating with APIs. So there's a server, you're using APIs, and
Yeah.
you contaminated and lost whatever you needed to solve.
Yeah, so obviously whenever you're investigating from a security incident response perspective, you'll want to understand what is context. So is this like an internal environment? How you would be doing those APIs, that would be super important to understand. So I think from a tainting perspective, you'd have to understand the context. I know that's a little bit of wordsmithing right there, but I want to kind of dive deeper into understand, the actual context of how you would do that. So, I think you'd have to understand why somebody would want you to go into that environment.
I think he's meaning forensic things.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get to that here.
Yeah.
My mic's back on.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
We are going to go into some of the forensics, but we will go into that.
Yeah, sorry for the technical difficulties. So jumping back in, so again, what's different with cloud incident response, and what do you want your overarching best practices and design goals to be? So these are going to be some of the top 10 that we focus on. So again, looking at your response objectives. How do you want to make sure that your recovery is essentially recovered in a certain amount of time? What kind of data do you need to look at and prioritize specifically? What stakeholders are important that you need to include internally or externally? Responding using the cloud, so using patterns of cloud native services of where the actual incident is happening and the data is occurring. And also something that I see a lot with customers is that they don't understand what they have in the cloud. They don't know what their inventory is of resources. So there's some different best practices that we'll talk about in terms of tagging and your account structure. And again, automating where possible to reduce the risk of human error and being able to programmatically triage. And lastly, we always want to be iterating and improving, and even the best, most mature security organizations know that there's always room for improvement. So these will be some of the different aspects that we walk through. So diving into the 10 best ways to evolve your cloud incident response. And you might be wondering, how did you come up with these? So again, Anna did write the AWS Cloud Incident Response white paper, but we did use industry best standards, so using the NIST framework. So again, if you're not in AWS, it's totally okay. It will also translate over to other cloud providers. We also wanted to make sure that we were using all the different experience that we've had with customers, so successful and unsuccessful use cases, and also balancing simplicity with robustness. We know that if you have too much on your plate, it can lead to analysis paralysis and just a bunch of tickets in the backlog. So we thought 10 was the perfect number. So I'm going to focus on people and processes, and then I'm going to turn it over to Anna. So number one, and again, you might think, oh, this is similar to traditional incident response, but we're going to try and make sure that you understand how you can be a little bit different in the cloud to mature it. So what you're going to want to do is really define your stakeholders. So building a RACI is something that I always do with my customers to help them understand, and it helps break down the shared responsibility model. So we'll do this in different types of aspects, so mapping it back to different NIST controls, also looking at specific AWS services, because like I talked about, depending on if it's a managed service, you might have less responsibility than if it's a different type of service. And something that's really key here is adding your cloud's stakeholders. So maybe you have internal cloud engineering teams, maybe you have an InfoSec team that's important to have, SecOps, all these different teams, but you also want to have information on your cloud provider too. Because in most cases, your cloud provider is going to have different support that they can provide you during an active incident. So for the example of this one, with AWS, there is AWS support that you can actually submit tickets. But something that's really cool that we have is the AWS Customer Incident Response Team, and this is actually a 24/7 global team of incident responders that help you during an active security event, and they help you on the customer side of the shared responsibility model. So they actually help you go in and triage. They look at root analysis to see in the logs how this happened, and they actually go in and help you review your account to see what security recommendations they can make to make sure this doesn't happen again. And one quick note of something that I see a lot with customers is they'll put people's personal emails in playbooks, so make sure you always have your distribution list and different ways of going through and submitting cases through the console, because that's something that people struggle with if it's their first time doing it during an incident. Another one that seems really obvious, but it can be a little difficult for different types of employees, is training your staff on the cloud. Something I see a lot, especially for organizations that are moving out of their data center and going into the cloud, a lot of their employees are really scared, and I don't blame them. It's really scary to learn a completely new technology. Some of them are nervous that they're not going to have the skills, and what we're here to do is your cloud provider is there to help to upskill your employees. And so what you're going to want to do, especially for incident response, is making sure that they understand the foundations. So like we talked about, depending on the different foundational services, they're going to have different responsibilities. So for EC2, having patch management, understanding configuration management, looking at S3, so access logs, being able to prevent deletion, versioning, VPCs, so VPC flow logs. Different aspects of these foundational services are going to be really important, and it's also going to help build confidence for your team during an actual event. And moving into AWS security, so IAM is arguably also a foundational service as well, but I would say it's also very tricky. So this one's something to dive deeply into with your employees and really help them understand. There's some really fun free workshops out there that you can kind of plug and play. IAM Access Analyzer, you can put different roles in and actually see what they have access to. And again, in the cloud, logging and monitoring is very different. So that's going to be a part of the training that you're going to want to focus on the most. And AWS Organizations isn't technically a security service, but it is governance. And so it's one of my favorite services, and one of the features that's probably most underutilized is called service control policies, and it actually has preventive guardrails. So you can go in and prevent any user from creating an S3 bucket without encryption. Or you can create a policy that would prevent users from going in specific regions you don't want them to go into. So that's going to be really important. And lastly, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but really understanding your environment. How is it architected? how many accounts do you have? How do developers authenticate into the AWS account? Where's your sensitive data stored? And we have a whole long list of all these different things from network to authentication that you can use. So that's part of the resources that you can use later and create that with your team. So next, the cloud incident response playbooks. So specifically to in the cloud for your incident response playbooks, what you're going to want to create is playbooks for the expected security events. So this is going to be things like ransomware events. The one that we see the most are compromised credentials. And then also playbooks for known security alerts using AWS Guard Duty. And AWS Guard Duty, if you're not familiar with it, looks at malicious activity that they're finding on the network and also in your applications. And you can also use partners as well to get more, I guess, context in the application layer. So things like Trend Micro and CrowdStrike, so that's really helpful as well. But with these different playbooks, again, we have a link for resourcing that you can actually use with your team. And it's going to have different API calls that you can use to gather different data during the investigation to help with your forensics and analysis and also the containment. Another aspect that's really important is developing your account structure and tagging strategy. Something that is a really great resource, it's free for everyone to use, is the AWS Security Reference Architecture, and it shows how you can build out a baseline organization within your AWS account. And so here what's going to be really important is creating your security organizational unit, so that's what OU stands for, and this is going to be where you have all your security tooling and log accounts so that you can essentially, again, isolate that into one separate account, and then again, you'll have your incident responders that have access into that account. Same for creating the forensics OU so that you have that in each region. Again, that's really important to have it in each region. That's something we see a lot, that people don't have, companies don't have visibility into each region of their different accounts. And also, too, something to note is that it does take time for these different services and resources to provision. So it's good to go ahead and set up your forensics OU before you have an actual event. And going back to how do you know what's in your account? There's thousands of resources. Maybe you work for a multinational global company that has a bunch of acquisitions. You're getting new companies every day. Tagging is going to be your ultimate strategy. It's going to help you so much, and this is honestly one of the easiest ways that you can just mature your incident response in the cloud. So when you're looking at tagging strategies, obviously having a naming standard, but also looking at security tags for your business unit, data classification, that's what we see a lot. People don't classify their data, so when they have a security event, they don't know what resources to recover first. And then also application owners. When we think of resources in the cloud, you don't say, oh, I have 1,000 EC2 instances. You think about your application and what that application is doing with all those resources. So again, you're going to want to tag those different resources. And like I mentioned, the service control policies, it's pretty cool. You can actually use those, again, to use conditional logic to either deny different actions, and then also with Lambda functions and AWS CloudWatch, if you want to get really nerdy, you can also trigger actions, which is my favorite too. So lastly, moving into the last people in process. So we're all probably fairly familiar with red teaming, purple team, blue team, tabletops, different types of simulations. This is not new to the cloud, but I did want to bring it up because you should be running it in your cloud environment. And something to note for your cloud provider is that most likely you probably will have to submit a form that you're going to do this in your cloud environment. Otherwise, your cloud provider might think that there is some type of trust and safety issue going on in your account. So for example, with AWS, there's simulated event forms that you fill out. We do have AWS Managed Services, so if you're using that where they help to run some of your infrastructure in the cloud, it's called Planned Event Management. So this is going to be something that you want to keep in mind. And with running simulations, so these are the 4 most common scenarios that we see in the cloud when it comes to different security events. Again, I think I mentioned that the number 1 that we see are compromised credentials. Companies are using long-term credentials that are accidentally published on GitHub or things like that that are discovered. So these are actually free workshops. Again, they're linked in our presentation that you can use. And the first one, so unauthorized IAM credential use. This one is essentially using infrastructure as code. So this is specifically with CloudFormation that you can deploy into your account, and it will provision a IAM user essentially that has unauthorized credentials that will essentially do reconnaissance and also privileged escalations. And it will have tools that will help you run through the logs, as well as using Cloud Saga, some open source tools that you can use to help, again, go in and do your analysis and contain and recover. The other one is cryptocurrency mining. So again, we see this sometimes in the cloud, and this is going to be another type of workshop where it's actually creating EC2 instances that then are going to be mimicking crypto mining, so making DNS requests to common crypto mining domains. And again, you'll have to walk through the scenarios of how do you actually contain this and recover. And then the last two, ransomware on S3, we actually have a lot of really great resources on this. So similar to the example that I mentioned earlier, but essentially an unauthorized user coming in and deleting different objects and holding it for ransom. And then the last one, looking at EC2 instances that have vulnerabilities and how that can be used to get credentials from EC2 instances to use that. So again, these are all available. They're in our slides, and they're actually all by the AWS Customer Incident Response team. So they've gathered the data that these are the most common events in the cloud. So I'll pass it to Anna for technology.
Yep. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So now we'll go on to, so we went through some of the people and process items that we decided were a part of this top 10. And so the next part of the top 10 is really focused on the technology items. So now we're going through the technology items. So when you think of preparing access, this actually happens more often than not where a incident responder goes to an incident and they don't have access. So one of the things that I have seen is been effective is actually creating read-only access for your incident responders, and then they also have a break glass for an emergency. So that would be kind of the recommended workflow is a read-only access and then break glass in the case of an emergency. Selecting and setting up logs. So I know maybe not the most exciting topic, but when you think about logging, the first thing you think about is identifying the right logs. This could be for a number of reasons. It could be for compliance, or you could select logs for, thinking about what is our threat model. So there's a number of reasons why you would select logs. From there, you would actually go about looking at log storage. So this will actually be connected to one of our other options, which is number 4, looking at your log analysis. So I'll link those in a bit. Identifying and implementing your log storage. So, log retention. And then lastly, looking at your mechanisms for log analysis. So say you use some sort of SIM, you may want to kind of connect back for your number 2, looking at how you connect those and actually do the log retention and analysis in the same place. And looking at the logs that we recommend from an AWS perspective for AWS incident response, these are the core 3. So CloudTrail, that is by far the number 1. And this is documenting all of our APIs. So when you think about AWS, it's really a bunch of APIs. You really want to make sure that you have the documentation, you have all those logs from an API perspective. So it's super important that you have that in place. And then next is Route 53 DNS logs. So if you do use Route 53, and that is your DNS provider, you should have this in place. And that is super important to have those DNS query logs from an incident perspective. And then lastly is VPC flow logs. So that'll be your network flow logs, and it will provide, your records with, source IP, destination IP, port, whether it's accepted or rejected. That will be in place for this.
And something to quickly note too with VPC flow logs is to take a look at the version that you have.
Yeah.
It defaults to version 1, but we're currently on version 5. And a lot of people ask, well, why doesn't it automatically go to version 5? It's because it would break some different applications of different orgs that have been in AWS for a very long time, but moving it up to version 5 would help to mature your incident response a lot because it adds more information in terms of context for the logs.
Awesome. The next part I want to kind of go through is starting with managed detection. So with any cloud provider, they will have a number of managed detection. So we have, within AWS, we have our Amazon GuardDuty. Again, this is a very low-cost service, so I would encourage you to also, explore other, options. It's a very low cost. It's really high value, but it provides a number of the threat intelligence, machine learning findings that can really be of value. So within the threat intelligence space, it would look for the known findings, as well as machine learning. It would provide some of those baselines as well. For a containment perspective, so from a containment perspective, there's kind of 3 general strategies. It's source containment, destination containment, and technique and access containment. So within source containment, this would be really focusing on blocking or filtering something to prevent access from a certain source. So in this example that I'm showing, you'd want to block access from a certain EC2 instance. So you would have a security group. You would find a way to access or modify that security group in order to modify it and block the access. So within this, within your strategy, you would want to go about and actually have that within your documentation. Kind of similarly, destination containment. This is when you're really, really focusing on blocking the destination. So blocking the target versus blocking the source. So in the last example I showed, you're really focusing on the source. In this example, we're really focusing on the destination. So in this example, you would find a way to block via maybe a network ACL, and you could do that via network ACL. And then last, this is more cloud focused, and this would be via technique and access containment. This would be more rotating or focusing on the IAM permissions in order to contain an incident. So this would be a bit different in the sense you could restrict permissions, you could revoke keys, you could revoke temporary access keys. That would be the way that you would go about actually containing this incident. But in general, with all 3 of these strategies, you should have these documented. You should go about these and have them in your incident response plan. And then last but not least, so developing your forensic capabilities. So there are similarities in a way. So you should still have backups, but you should also have what the key difference is in the cloud is having snapshots. So snapshots are different in that they're point-in-time backups, and then you can have those in place. And we encourage you guys to have testing in place as well in order to test those backups. And then last but not least, Sarah will go through some of the summary items.
Yeah, so to wrap it up, I'll let everyone take a photo of this one. So again, focusing on people and processes, so defining your stakeholders and really understanding how you can get in contact with your cloud provider in the case of an active security event, as well as if you have any partners that maybe manage and operate any of your cloud technology. Making sure that you train your staff on AWS. I like to say this a lot, but being empathetic and really understanding that they're learning a new technology and it's an exciting time, but it can also be scary. But really diving into those foundational services and getting them excited about security. And again, understanding what is actually in your account. So that's gonna be something that's really important to help give your team confidence during an active security event. Oops. Developing cloud incident response playbooks. So like Anna was talking about with forensics and the different aspects of, sorry, I'm blanking what you were just talking about. But using the API calls essentially that you can use to run through these different playbooks. And there's actually, again, a resource in here that's GitHub repo, and it's going to have different common guard duty findings. There's different folders like EC2, EKS, IAM, guard duty findings that actually will walk through what you should do and different AWS command line scripts that you should run to help get snapshots. That's what I was trying to think. So that you can get snapshots and backups before you actually delete resources and help before the actual containment. And you can actually use these, again, as a baseline and then customize them based on your architecture. Developing your account structure. So again, the AWS security reference architecture is really helpful. You could use it with any cloud provider. It's kind of just like your baseline best security architecture that you should implement. So again, your security organizational unit where you're going to have your security tooling and logs, as well as your forensics OU that you need in all of your different regions, and your tagging strategy so that you know exactly what's going to be your highest priority and severity level for an active security event. And again, running simulations, so it's not the first time that your team is seeing ransomware in S3. They've been through it maybe a couple of times. Normally what we suggest for companies, again, it depends on your organization, but some people will do it every quarter. Sometimes it's twice a year. It depends on how much you're changing your architecture. Again, cloud changes a lot, so if you're constantly getting new services, if you've ever been to reInvent, you know, they announce like 100 new things. So it's always good to do so that you're constantly understanding what's in your environment and the different attack surface. And then for the last half, and if you want to go through the last half.
Yeah, so preparing your access, making sure your incident response folks have the proper access, and then setting up your proper logs, enabling those logs so that your incident response folks have that, and then enabling your detection. So we recommend starting with the managed detections, and then developing your containment strategy and your forensic capabilities. So.
And we do have homework for you. So here are some of the top things that you can do to apply your learning within the first month or 3 months. So again, identifying and aligning with your key stakeholders, developing your RACI. That's one of the first things I do with customers to help them better understand what they're actually responsible for. Another thing we do is making sure that we have the on-call escalations in place immediately. Remember the listserv distribution lists for emails. Again, making sure that you're documenting and developing your different architectural diagrams, and you're also updating them when you make changes and add different services so that your incident responders can truly understand what they're working with during an event and can walk through those cloud-specific playbooks like AWS Guard Duty findings that are fairly common. Determining your tagging strategy and access level events. So Anna did mention the read-only access that we found to be very successful, but also break glass if needed. And developing your logging strategy, so understanding what types of logs that you need. Again, a really easy win is looking at your VPC flow logs and what default you're on. So we're on default 5 now, but most of them are defaulting to 1. So that's an easy one. And managed detection, as well as the containment and forensics capabilities. I will share too, a customer example that I see a lot is that sometimes customers will only be using, let's say, US East 1. They only set up their logging and monitoring for US East 1. And then if they have a security event, the threat actor will go into another region and start deploying EC2 instances. Let's say it's the cryptocurrency mining one, and they have no visibility. So that's something that what Anna was talking about, you're gonna want to deploy GuardDuty into all of your different regions so that you have visibility, same with CloudTrail, so that you can understand what's happening in your environment. And going back to how you can better prevent this, with AWS organizations, the service control policies, you can actually create a policy to, again, prevent any type of user from going into a region that you don't allow. So SCPs are also a very quick win.
Yep.
So these are the different resources that we all mentioned. And then at the very bottom, I just wanted to point that out. So those are the workshops. Again, those are the common security events that we see in AWS, and same for other cloud providers as well. The fifth one that I didn't mention is about security tooling. So it's open source tools like Cloud Saga and looking at logging specifically. So it's not focused on an event, but more how to use those tools. But yeah, thank you so much for coming, and we will open it up to questions. I don't know how much time. Okay, perfect.
All right, we got this guy.
And I think if you want to come to the mic, and I know we can also pass mics around.
Yeah, I see one of your point is log management to be enabled, and maintenance is needed. It's needed for the security. But what if from FinOps perspective, one of my customers sees is 10% billing is for the logs management. Out of 10 million monthly bill, 1 million is for the logs, storing the log, managing the log. So what are the best practices? How do we avoid, since FinOps is also critical for the customer?
Yeah, so for reducing billing for logging, there's some different types of things that you can look at. So there's AWS Trusted Advisor, and there's also it's the Cost Explorer. So that's going to be looking at how you can reduce your costs based on logs. We also have a lot of great partners that you can use for different SIEMs, like Splunk. Another service that actually came out recently was, I guess, introduced at reInvent, but it'll be generally available in May, is Security Lake. And so that has reduced cost as well for all the logging, because it's something that our team's aware of, and we always take customer feedback very seriously so that we can continue to reduce cost. And I know we've actually reduced cost of services 126 times since 2006. But those are some of the different services you can use, and I'm happy to talk to you after so that I can connect you with your account team so we can see what we can do to reduce it. Any other questions?
Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
I saw a release in AWS about AWS WAF bot for bot protection. But do you believe what is the most effective strategy to protect from bot attack? So honeypot and other concepts are coming, which is to protect and mitigate the risk from bot. So what are your thoughts on bot
Bots.
management?
Yeah, so I think that, so I would lean on our AWS WAF team. I can connect you with them. I don't, the Edge team kind of has their own group. So if you have further questions, I can just connect you with them. Yeah. Dario, what the hell? Dario in,
I guess Dario with the team.
Hello. Hi. Can you hear me?
oh,
No. Okay.
okay.
On the bot control, AWS WAF has grown a lot in terms of bot protection. There are a lot of features related to that, and you can use third-party solutions as well. You can integrate it with CloudFront, that is the distribution, to add a third-party solution for bot protection as well. So you have options there. And also, if you have Shield Advanced, that is a DDoS protection service, then they are going to help you also to mitigate bot attacks when they are volumetric. So you have that. And on the API tainting, keep in mind that everything in AWS, that everything I do through the console, through the CLI, or through APIs, it's all being logged and it's being recorded in that CloudTrail. And that's not going to taint the actual APIs that your service. They are APIs for the data plane. They are not APIs of your application. So it's not going to be tightened at all. Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Dario's on our team.
Do we have any other questions?
One in the
Feel
back,
free.
it looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we can go back.
This one?
Also, if there aren't any other questions, can we please thank our speakers?
Thank you.
Thank you.